There is a good chance that right now, wherever you are looking at a QWERTY keyboard on your phone, your laptop, or the tablet propped up next to your coffee. That keyboard was designed in 1873 by a man named Christopher Latham Sholes. And here is the thing about it. The mechanical typewriters of the era had a persistent, maddening problem. If you typed too fast, the keys would jam. So Sholes rearranged the letters to separate the most commonly used pairs, giving each key time to fall back into place before the next one struck. It worked. It also made typing slower and more effortful than it needed to be. Now, you might assume that once the mechanical jamming problem was solved, once computers arrived and keys no longer jammed for any reason whatsoever, we would naturally migrate to something better. In 1932, a researcher named August Dvorak designed a layout built to reduce finger movement and fatigue, and most people who have tried it report it is noticeably more comfortable. It should have won. It turns out, it did not come close. QWERTY survived not because it was right, but because it got there first, spread widely enough, and became too embedded to displace. Every typist already knew it. Every manufacturer built for it. Every school taught it. And learning a new layout felt like more trouble than it was worth. That is what a dominant design looks like. Not the best solution. The solution that reached critical mass. Which brings me to the question I want to start with today. In artificial intelligence, in 2026, who is the QWERTY? And the honest answer, the one that business media rarely leads with, is that we genuinely do not know yet. In 1975, two researchers at MIT, William Abernathy and James Utterback, published a landmark analysis of how innovation actually unfolds in technology industries, a framework that has held up remarkably well across 50 years of technological change. Their observation was elegant. Every technology moves through three recognizable phases, and the strategic choices that make sense in each phase are almost completely different. The first is the fluid phase. This is the wide-open period when multiple competing designs exist simultaneously, nobody knows which will win, and companies are making genuinely different bets. The early automobile industry was like this, before anyone agreed on where to put the steering wheel, before the internal combustion engine locked in, before petrol stations existed. The early home video market was like this, when VHS and Betamax were genuinely competing. Possibility is high. Commitment is dangerous. The second is the transitional phase. A dominant design begins to emerge, not necessarily because it is the best, but because it has reached critical mass. Network effects accelerate it. More users attract more developers. More developers attract more users. Standards form around it, and competitors either adopt it or get squeezed out. The third is the specific phase. The design is locked in, and competition shifts from innovation to efficiency. Who can deliver the dominant design faster, cheaper, and more reliably? The window for differentiation has closed. You are now in an execution game. Here's the twist. By every available measure, artificial intelligence in 2026 is still firmly in the fluid phase. The model landscape is genuinely unsettled. You have OpenAI's GPT family, Anthropic's Claude, Google's Gemini, Meta's Llama, Mistral from France, and then, the detail that tends to surprise people the most, Chinese models now account for up to 46% of enterprise token usage in the United States, up from under 5% in the first half of 2025. Pause on that for a moment. Nearly half of all enterprise AI workloads in the world's largest economy are running on Chinese infrastructure. That is not the race narrative that most business media would have you believe. The economics here are extraordinary. DeepSeek's most capable models cost roughly 60 to 90% less than their US equivalents, while matching them on many agentic benchmarks. If we're being completely honest, the US winning the AI race story and the actual purchasing behavior of US companies are currently pointing in rather different directions. For anyone making strategic decisions about AI right now, this is not a footnote. It is a diagnostic. The fluid phase rewards flexibility. Betting everything on one provider, one model, one ecosystem, when no dominant design has emerged, is a structural risk that the framework makes very clear. Before we get to how companies should respond, it is worth briefly establishing the scale of what is actually at stake, because the dominant design question plays out simultaneously at 3 levels, and conflating them is a common mistake. At the micro level, this is about individual organizations, one hospital, one retailer, one logistics firm, making an AI investment and measuring what they get back. Most ROI conversations happen here, and we will spend significant time in this territory in the chapters ahead. At the meso level, it is about entire industries. When AI restructures how legal work, or medical diagnosis, or financial services operates, the competitive dynamics of that industry shift in ways that go beyond any single company's spreadsheet. At the macro level, it is about economies and societies. AlphaFold, developed by DeepMind, did not simply help one pharmaceutical company. It restructured how protein research happens globally. In October 2024, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded partly in recognition of the science AlphaFold had made possible. That is a macro-level effect, and it happened within a decade of the technology being conceived. These 3 levels are connected in important ways. A dominant design does not just change one company's costs, it restructures an industry. And enough industries reshaped by the same technology become a macro-level transformation. Keep that perspective in mind as we go, because every framework in this module is ultimately asking the same underlying question. How do you position yourself to create and capture value when the technology is still moving this fast? Let me tell you about IBM Watson for Oncology, because it is exactly the kind of story that tends to get quietly filed away once the press cycle moves on. In 2011, IBM's Watson system famously beat the world's best Jeopardy players, and IBM, understandably excited, decided to turn that capability into a healthcare business. The pitch was compelling: an AI that could analyze a patient's records against the entire published literature on oncology and recommend treatments. It was the first major AI health product of its kind. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center trained the system. Hospitals around the world signed on. In 2016, the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center halted its project. $62 million spent, no clinically usable system. Internal documents reviewed by Stat News in 2017 revealed that Watson had been recommending treatments oncologists described as unsafe and incorrect, including chemotherapy combinations that could cause fatal hemorrhage. The software had been trained on a small set of synthetic, hypothetical cases rather than real patient data, and it simply could not generalize. By 2022, IBM sold off the entire Watson Health division. Total investment? Over $4 billion. IBM Watson for Oncology had every first-mover advantage the textbook describes: the brand, the capital, the partnerships, the head start, and it failed, expensively, quietly, and in a way that has largely been absorbed by the narrative of pivoting to different AI opportunities. Now, you might assume from reading the business literature that first-mover advantage is, on balance, a reliable predictor of success. Marvin Lieberman and David Montgomery's 1988 paper makes a genuinely compelling case. First movers can lock in resources, build switching costs, move down the learning curve faster than any follower, and define what the product category means in the customer's mind. And when the conditions are right, all of that is real. Amazon built logistics infrastructure before anyone understood what was happening. Netflix defined streaming before cable companies could respond. Google built a search index at a scale that took years for anyone to approach. Here's the twist, though. We remember those stories because they worked. We tend not to dwell on the IBM Watsons of the world, or on the fact that MySpace was first, that Blockbuster had an internal streaming option before Netflix launched, or that the original smartphone app stores were not Apple's. If we're being completely honest, there are probably as many first-mover train wrecks as there are first-mover success stories. We just suffer from a collective case of survivorship bias. The honest version of first-mover advantage sounds more like a conditional. Being first can create durable competitive advantage if the technology is genuinely ready, if your capabilities match the specific application, and if you can build switching costs before a better resourced competitor catches up. Remove any one of those conditions, and being first mostly means you pay for the market's education. So where does that leave business leaders in 2026? It turns out that Utterback and Abernathy's framework offers something more useful than a prediction. It offers a diagnostic. And the diagnostic question is straightforward. What phase is the specific AI application you are considering actually in? If the answer is fluid, multiple competing tools, no clear standard, rapid capability improvement, then the premium is on flexibility. Build for optionality. Avoid deep vendor lock-in. Stay close to the technology curve and treat any AI contract with meaningful switching costs as a structural risk. This is where most enterprise AI investment sits right now. If the answer is transitional, a dominant design is visibly emerging in your specific use case, then the window for competitive differentiation is narrowing and the logic shifts. This is the moment to move with conviction, because the design is locking in around you, and the companies that commit now will shape what standard looks like. And if the answer is specific, the technology is commoditized. Everyone has access to essentially the same tools at similar price points. Then the competitive question is no longer about the AI at all. It is about your data, your processes, the people who know how to use it, and your capacity to execute better than anyone else with the same inputs. The race is not over, but it will not stay open forever. And knowing which phase you are actually in is the beginning of a real strategy. That is the landscape, the fluid phase, the first mover question, and the 3 levels at which it all plays out. What none of this tells you is how to win once you have diagnosed where you are. For that, there is a framework that has been around for 45 years and turns out to be surprisingly well-suited to thinking about AI competition. And alongside it, some research from BCG that cuts through more noise than almost anything else published in this space. There is also something else, a pattern in how companies are actually deploying AI right now that does not appear in the theory at all. We will get there before this module is done. Stay with me. Somewhere right now, there is a board meeting happening. And if I had to guess, it looks something like this. A slide appears on the screen with AI strategy in confident letters at the top, beneath which sits a roadmap divided neatly into 3 phases: explore, scale, and transform. The phases are connected by arrows, and the arrows, meaningfully, all point to the right, toward the future, where things will presumably be better. Around the table, people are nodding. The CEO is nodding. The CFO, who was not entirely certain what the meeting was about when it went into the diary, is nodding along. A board member has flown in from another city specifically to attend this nod, and is doing so with particular conviction. What is somewhat less clear to anyone in that room, if we're being completely honest, is what problem the AI is actually solving. But the competitor's annual report mentioned AI 14 times, and right-pointing arrows have a remarkable ability to project confidence even when the destination is left deliberately unspecified. Michael Porter, who has spent his career studying exactly this kind of moment, would have a great deal to say about that meeting. Porter is a Harvard Business School professor who, in 1980, published a framework called the 3 Generic Strategies. It is 45 years old. It is also, I would argue, more useful for thinking about AI investment decisions in 2026 than most of the AI-specific strategy research published in the last 3 years. Because his central insight was not about any particular technology. It was about the fundamental nature of competitive advantage itself. There are, Porter argued, only 3 ways to build a durable competitive position. Companies that try to pursue all 3 simultaneously, or none of them deliberately, end up stuck in the middle, squeezed by specialists on every side with no distinct reason for a customer to choose them. Let us look at all 3 through the lens of what is actually happening in the AI market right now. Cost leadership means becoming the lowest cost producer in your industry. Not necessarily the cheapest for the customer, though often that too. The goal is a cost structure that nobody else can sustainably match. In the AI model market, the clearest live example is DeepSeek. And the numbers here are worth sitting with for a moment because they are genuinely extraordinary. DeepSeek's most capable models cost roughly 14 cents per million input tokens. OpenAI's GPT 5.5 is priced at $5 per million tokens. That is not a rounding difference or a product tier distinction. That is a 35-fold gap between 2 models that land within a percentage point of each other on many enterprise benchmarks. The economic logic for a business running significant AI workloads is almost uncomfortably straightforward. It turns out, US companies have noticed. As we covered in Chapter 1, Chinese models now account for up to 46% of enterprise token usage in the United States. Coinbase cut its AI spend nearly in half by routing agents to Chinese models. Lindy, an AI automation company, moved 100% of its traffic from Anthropic's Claude to DeepSeek. Now, if we're being completely honest, there is something important to acknowledge here. DeepSeek's pricing is partly possible because of significant Chinese state support, subsidized compute, preferential data access, and a structural cost environment that a purely commercial company operating without government backing could not easily replicate. This is the same playbook China used to build its electric vehicle industry, and whether the pricing is sustainable at scale without that support is a genuine open question. But as a demonstration of cost leadership strategy operating in real time, in one of the most competitive markets on Earth, it is working. The 35-fold gap is real. The market share is real. And any AI strategy discussion that ignores the cost dimension because it feels geopolitically inconvenient is not a strategy discussion. It is a comfort exercise. Underneath the pricing story is a set of architectural choices, documented in academic work on AI business strategy, including research by Story and colleagues, that have changed the unit economics of enterprise AI in ways the per-token price comparison only partially captures. RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, connects a model to a live knowledge base at query time rather than baking proprietary knowledge into expensive training runs, keeping AI current on internal information at a fraction of traditional cost. ICL, or in-context learning, allows a model to adapt to new tasks from examples provided in the prompt itself without updating its weights, meaning organizations can customize AI for new use cases at near zero marginal cost per adaptation. Together, RAG and ICL explain much of why a well-architected AI system can operate at costs that make DeepSeek's pricing logic replicable across domains beyond model provision. The third development is LAMs, large action models, and this is where the risk calculus changes entirely. LAMs do not generate text for a human to then act on. They execute actions directly inside live business systems: booking, filing, updating, ordering, triggering workflows. That is the transition from AI as advisor to AI as operator, and it is a substantial shift in both the value profile and the governance requirements. The efficiency potential is real, so proportionally is the consequence of an error. Both need to be on the business case. More broadly, Cost leadership through AI across industries flows through a consistent set of operational levers. Process automation reduces labor cost in repetitive tasks across back office, logistics, and customer service functions. Predictive maintenance detects equipment failure before it happens, eliminating unplanned downtime that costs more per hour than any maintenance program. Energy efficiency gains from AI-optimized systems, building management, data center cooling, manufacturing line control, reduce operating costs at scale. And supply chain optimization compounds all of the above by reducing inventory waste, shortening lead times, and synchronizing demand signals with production capacity. DeepSeek's pricing story is cost leadership at the model layer. These are the mechanisms that make cost leadership real at the operational layer of most businesses. Differentiation means offering something genuinely distinctive that customers will pay a premium for. Not just different for its own sake, meaningfully, credibly better in a way that matters to the specific people buying it. Anthropic's Claude is a reasonable example. Here's the twist. The differentiation is not raw capability, because on many benchmarks, Claude, GPT, and Gemini are remarkably close. The differentiation is trust, safety, and enterprise governance, constitutional AI, interpretability research, and a company that has made safety its founding argument rather than its compliance obligation. For organizations operating in regulated industries, finance, healthcare, legal, that is a real purchasing reason, and it is not primarily about the model's output quality. It is about what happens when something goes wrong, who is accountable, and whether the audit trail holds up. Anthropic's differentiation is built for exactly that conversation. Apple offers a similar example from a different angle. Apple has consistently declined to lead the AI capability race, positioning its AI features instead around on-device processing. Your data stays on your device. In a world where AI privacy concerns are rising and enterprise data governance is increasingly scrutinized, that is a differentiation strategy applied to AI with some discipline. What does AI-enabled differentiation actually look like at the operational level? The recurring patterns are advanced analytics capabilities that surface insights from proprietary data that competitors using off-the-shelf tools simply cannot access, pattern detection, risk signals, market intelligence embedded in data only you hold, and superior customer service. Not just faster responses, but AI that understands a customer's full context and history, producing interactions that create genuine loyalty rather than mere satisfaction. These are the mechanisms behind Anthropic's differentiation thesis, and Apple's as well, even though neither company would frame it quite that clinically. The risk, as Porter was clear about, is that differentiation must be actively defended. If the trusted, safety-focused model and the 35 cents per million token model converge on capability, the cost advantage will exert enormous pressure on the premium. Differentiation strategies have to keep earning their position, which is, of course, part of what makes them genuinely strategic. Focus means selecting a narrow segment and serving it more completely than any generalist ever could. A specific customer group, a particular use case, a problem with genuine depth. This is where AI has its highest success rate, and it is consistently underappreciated. Harvey is a legal AI company, now valued at $11 billion as of early 2026. It does not try to do everything. It does legal work, contract review, due diligence, regulatory analysis, with a depth and domain specificity that general-purpose models cannot match for that application. Law firms pay a premium for it precisely because it is not also trying to write marketing copy and plan business travel. AlphaFold, developed by DeepMind, is the canonical example. It does one thing: predict the three-dimensional structure of proteins from their amino acid sequence. It does it better than any human researcher and faster than any previous computational method. And the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2024 was awarded partly in recognition of the science it made possible. It did not try to be a general intelligence. It solved the specific problem completely. Bloomberg GPT is trained specifically on financial data for financial use cases. Cursor is a coding assistant. The pattern is consistent. The narrower and deeper the application, the better the chance of building something genuinely defensible. The more a company says, "Our AI does everything," the more likely it is to do nothing particularly well. The mechanisms that make focus defensible are worth naming as individual arguments, because each one compounds the others. Target marketing built on proprietary segment data that generalist providers simply cannot accumulate because they serve too many industries to go deep on any one. Predictive analytics calibrated to a particular sector's specific failure modes and decision cycles, rather than averaged across every industry at once. Customer insights that deepen the longer you stay focused, becoming more valuable over time precisely because they represent something a new entrant cannot replicate from a standing start. And product development driven entirely by problems that one customer group faces, creating solutions that nobody else builds because nobody else knows the problem at that depth. Harvey has all four of these for law firms. A general-purpose AI assistant, by definition, has none of them. Porter called the failure mode stuck in the middle, and it is the place most AI investment quietly ends up. Not cheap enough to win on cost, not distinctive enough to command a premium, not focused enough to dominate any segment. A general-purpose chatbot deployed for customer service, selected because the CEO asked about the AI strategy and someone needed an answer, running at roughly the same cost and capability as 3 competitor equivalents. The arrows pointed to the right, but no position was chosen. For executives, the diagnostic question Porter's framework really asks is this: which of these 3 positions are you actually building toward with this investment? And is the AI you are deploying genuinely serving that position, or is it serving the need to have something to show? Those are different questions, and they tend to have different answers. Now, here is the problem with Porter's framework as a practical guide to AI investment. It tells you where to position yourself. It does not tell you how to distinguish between AI that actually changes your competitive position and AI that merely creates the impression of one. For that, there is research from BCG that I find more practically useful than almost anything else written about AI strategy in the last 5 years. Francois Candelon is a managing director and senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group and global director of the BCG Henderson Institute. He and his colleagues spent several years studying what actually separated AI leaders from AI laggards, companies that created measurable value from AI versus companies that had significant AI activity and very little to show for it. The finding was straightforward enough to sound almost too simple. The companies that led started with a problem. The companies that lagged started with the technology. Candelon's framework draws a clear distinction between what he calls table stakes and golden use cases. And making this distinction vivid, I think, is one of the more useful things this module can do. Table stakes are the AI applications that every company in your industry will eventually deploy. Automated customer service, AI-assisted document processing, email drafting tools, basic demand forecasting. These applications reduce costs and improve efficiency, and that is genuinely valuable. But they do not create competitive advantage because your competitor is deploying the same tools from the same vendors at roughly the same time. It turns out, this is not a new problem. Think of having a website in 2005. If you did not have one, you were behind. If you had one, you were not ahead. You were simply not behind. Table stakes is the price of admission. Necessary, but not sufficient. Golden use cases are different in kind, not just degree. These are AI applications built on something a competitor cannot easily replicate. Proprietary data accumulated over years, a specific operational capability, deep domain expertise, or a problem that is uniquely yours to solve because of who you are and what you know. These create genuine differentiation because the AI is not doing something everyone else is also doing with the same inputs. It is doing something only you can do in this particular way. The example that makes this most vivid is Profluent Bio. They used a protein language model called ProGen to do what they called inverse drug design. Conventional drug discovery works by testing molecules to find ones with desired properties, a slow, expensive, high failure rate process that has governed pharmaceutical research for decades. Profluent inverted it. They designed molecules with specified properties from scratch, then synthesized and tested them in the laboratory. Of 100 candidate sequences, 75 showed the desired functional activity, performing as well as proteins found in nature, despite being sequences that nature had never produced. The AI was not making the existing process faster. It was enabling a process that did not previously exist. That is a golden use case. The value is not incremental, it is structural. For any AI investment on the table right now, the most useful question a CFO or executive can ask is a simple one. Is this table stakes or a golden use case? If it is table stakes, useful, necessary, must do, then the strategic question is not whether to do it, but how fast and how efficiently it can be done well enough. The competitive advantage will not come from the AI itself, it will come from execution, speed, and cost discipline. If it is a golden use case, AI applied to something where you hold a genuine, hard-to-replicate advantage, then the strategic question is entirely different. Are you protecting and deepening the proprietary data, the domain expertise, and the specific operational capability that makes this application better than anything a competitor could build from a standing start? Most organizations, if they are honest, are mostly deploying table stakes. That is not a failure. Table stakes needs to get done, but calling it a strategy, dressing it in right-pointing arrows and presenting it as a competitive position, is where the expensive confusion tends to begin. Porter identified the same failure mode in 1980. He just did not know he was describing something that would still be showing up in AI board presentations 45 years later. His later work made a point that applies as directly now. Sustainable competitive advantage is never a fixed state. It requires continuous innovation and adaptation within a chosen position. The organizations that lead in AI are not the ones with the best deployment on a given date. They are the ones still building the capability that makes next year's deployment better than this year's. So now you have the landscape and the lens. A fluid phase technology where no dominant design has emerged. 3 ways to build a competitive position, and a clear distinction between AI that is the price of admission and AI that is genuinely transformative. Here is the thing, though. None of this tells you what the investment is actually worth. And measuring that turns out to be, and I mean this with genuine conviction, one of the more philosophically interesting problems in business right now. Not because the value is not real, because most organizations are measuring it with the wrong tool, on the wrong timeline, against the wrong baseline. And the gap between what is being measured and what is actually happening is large enough to explain something that initially sounds absurd. How executives can be at maximum AI investment, approving every business case, expanding every team, and simultaneously be unable to point to a measurable financial return. There is also a specific framework that makes that paradox suddenly click into sense. The clearest taxonomy I have found for why the numbers look the way they do and what to do about it. I will introduce it when we get there. That is Chapter 3. In a recent Gartner survey of corporate healthcare provider executives, more than half of them, 56%, named software and technology as one of their top 3 strategic priorities. Not a side project, not a pilot, their number 1 focus area, competing for budget alongside everything else that keeps a healthcare organization running. They are doubling down, expanding teams, approving business cases, building roadmaps. And when you ask the same executives what their AI investments have actually returned, in measurable, auditable, reportable financial terms, the answer gets significantly quieter. Technology is the #1 priority. What it is actually worth remains an open question. Now, you might assume the problem is the technology itself, that AI simply has not delivered what the hype promised. And there is some truth in that. But I think the more interesting explanation is sitting just underneath it, which is that most organizations are measuring the wrong thing, or measuring the right thing with the wrong tool, or not measuring anything at all and then being surprised when they cannot find a number they never defined. The difference between AI isn't working and we don't know how to measure whether AI is working is significant. Part of what makes AI valuation particularly difficult is that it starts with perception. Chen and colleagues, writing in 2025, describe what they call the perceived value of AI, the benefits and advantages that individuals or organizations believe they will gain from using AI technologies. That believed value is what drives investment decisions. The measurement frameworks in this chapter are how you determine whether the belief is justified and where the gap between the two actually lives. Let us start with the calculation everyone reaches for first. Return on investment, ROI, is net gain minus investment cost divided by investment cost expressed as a percentage. Simple, widely understood, and, on its own, almost always insufficient for evaluating an AI investment. Here is why. Consider Meridian Logistics, a hypothetical mid-sized freight company evaluating an AI-powered route optimization system. The total implementation cost is $800,000, covering software, integration work, and operations team training. The projected annual net benefit, after subtracting ongoing maintenance and licensing, is $132,000 per year over a 10-year deployment period. The company's cost of capital is 10%. A CFO reviewing this business case has 4 standard tools available. Each one tells a slightly different part of the story. Method 1. Simple ROI. Total benefits over 10 years, $1.32 million. Subtract the initial investment. Net gain, $520,000. Divide by the investment, multiply by 100, result, 65%. That sounds like a reasonable win. Method 2. Payback period. How long until the investment recovers its cost? 800,000 divided by 132,000, 6.1 years. Just over 6 years into a 10-year project. Borderline, but acceptable. Method 3. Net present value. Here is where it gets interesting. NPV discounts those future cash flows back to today's value because a dollar earned in year 10 is worth less than a dollar available now. At 10%, the present value of $132,000 per year for 10 years is approximately $811,000. Subtract the initial investment of $800,000, and the NPV is positive $11,087. Positive, technically. But $11,087 of net value created on an $800,000 investment is a very thin margin. Method 4. Internal rate of return. IRR is the discount rate at which the NPV becomes exactly zero, the true annualized return the investment generates. For Meridian's numbers, that figure is 10.3% against a cost of capital of 10%. It clears the bar by less than 1/3 of a percentage point. Here is the teaching moment. Simple ROI says 65%. Sounds good. Payback says just over 6 years. Borderline. NPV says $11,000 on $800,000 invested. Barely positive. IRR says 10.3% against a 10% hurdle, the narrowest possible margin. All 4 methods technically say yes, but barely. This is the business case you would want to stress test and scrutinize before approving. Exactly the kind of case that looks considerably better on the slide than it does when the assumptions are examined closely. The reason executives use all 4 methods together is that each one reveals something the others don't. Simple ROI ignores the time value of money. Payback ignores what happens after the investment recovers its cost. NPV requires you to specify your cost of capital, which is itself a judgment call. IRR can be distorted by unconventional cash flow patterns. Used together, they triangulate towards something closer to the truth. Soft ROI is the category that appears in almost every AI business case, and it has a reputation problem. Not because it is illegitimate, but because it is remarkably easy to invoke after the fact as consolation for a disappointing, hard ROI. The pattern goes like this. An AI deployment produces underwhelming operational savings, so the narrative shifts. The productivity gains are real, they're just harder to quantify. Staff are spending less time on repetitive tasks. There are retention benefits we didn't initially model. Every one of these things might be true. They are also precisely what you say when the hard ROI hasn't arrived and you need to justify the investment. The way to keep soft ROI honest is to define the metric before you deploy, not after. If the argument is that AI will improve decision speed across the risk team, then the baseline should be measured now, the target specified in advance, and the methodology agreed before anyone touches the system. Under those conditions, soft ROI becomes evidence. Under any other conditions, it becomes a flexible number that adjusts to fit whatever the case needs. Soft ROI genuinely exists, and the academic literature has become more precise about what it contains. Productivity gains from AI copilot tools are documented across knowledge work roles. Customer satisfaction and customer experience improvements appear in NPS cohorts before they appear in revenue. The sequencing matters for how you measure them. Employee engagement rises when AI absorbs the most repetitive, cognitively draining parts of knowledge work, leaving people doing the things they actually find meaningful. This effect is documented across multiple sectors. Centage 2025, Blue Prism 2025. Brand enhancement follows. The organization that deploys AI effectively signals capability and forward thinking, which compounds in talent markets and customer trust over years. Decision quality, harder to measure but not impossible, has peer-reviewed evidence in specific domains. These are not soft in the sense of being vague or invented. They are soft in the specific sense of being harder to reduce to a quarterly financial figure, which is a measurement problem rather than a reality problem. They require the same rigor as hard ROI to stand up under scrutiny. The rule is simple enough. Define the metric first, measure the baseline second, deploy the AI third. In that order, soft ROI is legitimate. In any other order, it is a story. Social and environmental ROI are the two categories that most business frameworks treat as optional appendices. Worth a mention for sustainability reporting purposes, but not the main event. It turns out there is a case for taking them more seriously than that. The positive side of social ROI can be substantial. Google's flood forecasting initiative now provides early warning alerts in more than 80 countries, reaching populations that would otherwise receive no advance notice of flooding events. The return is measured in lives and livelihoods protected. It does not figure on any company's standard ROI calculation, but it is a return. AlphaFold's contribution to protein science has been estimated to have compressed decades of potential research into a few years. The downstream implications for drug discovery are still accumulating. These are returns that no single organization captures privately, and yet they are real consequences of AI investment decisions. The academic literature on AI's social impact, drawing particularly on work from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, 2025, and the World Economic Forum, 2024, identifies 5 recurring categories through which AI generates non-commercial value. The first is community engagement, through platforms that extend access to expertise and civic participation to populations previously excluded by geography or cost. The second is equitable access to services, diagnostic AI in underserved settings, delivering healthcare insight that was previously available only near specialist centers. The third is ethical and responsible AI use, when governance is built in from the start rather than retrofitted. Preventing algorithmic harm to the populations most at risk of it constitutes a social return in its own right. The fourth is workforce development, training and upskilling programs that build capability in communities navigating technological displacement, turning a potential loss into a durable gain. And the fifth is alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. Climate modeling, disease surveillance, and resource optimization programs with outcomes measurable in public health and environmental terms. None of these figure on a company's income statement. All of them are genuine consequences of AI investment decisions. One of these deserves particular attention here because it connects directly to the ROI calculation in ways most financial frameworks miss. When healthcare organizations deploy AI-assisted diagnostics, they rely on patient data, among the most sensitive data any institution holds, protected by privacy legislation, subject to breach liability, and foundational to patient trust. The business case for the AI system rarely includes the cost of data governance failure, the breach incident, the regulatory penalty, the reputational consequence, the erosion of patient consent that can then degrade the model's future performance. Responsible data governance, clear consent frameworks, transparent data use policies, robust security architecture is not a compliance cost imposed on an otherwise profitable AI deployment. It is the condition under which the deployment remains profitable. In healthcare specifically, organizations that earn and maintain patient trust are the ones that retain access to the data that keeps the AI performing. The ones that lose that trust often find the model degrades alongside the relationship. Ethical AI is not a constraint on ROI. It is a determinant of its sustainability. The environmental side requires more honesty because it is less flattering. AI infrastructure has an energy and water footprint that is significant and still growing. Data centers in Ireland in 2026 account for approximately 20% of the national electricity grid, a figure that has become a genuine policy problem as the country tries to manage demand against its renewable transition commitments. Large AI model training runs can produce hundreds of tons of CO2 equivalent. Research from the University of California, Riverside estimated that OpenAI's systems use roughly 500 milliliters of water per conversation for server cooling, which, at the scale of hundreds of millions of conversations per day, becomes a meaningful resource demand. The clean energy argument is real. The direction of travel is genuine. But marginal AI grid demand often draws on whatever is available at that moment, which, in many regions, means gas or coal while renewables are still being built out. The positive environmental ledger, and there is one, covers 5 documented areas, each with a different character. Energy efficiency is where the evidence is clearest. AI-optimized data center cooling, smart grid management, and building energy systems are reducing consumption in ways that partially offset the demand side. Resource management follows. AI-driven precision agriculture, water usage monitoring, and materials optimization, reducing industrial waste at a scale no previous monitoring approach made practical. Environmental monitoring has shifted from periodic measurement to near real-time tracking through satellite-based AI that now covers deforestation rates, ocean health, and atmospheric composition continuously, building the data infrastructure that effective climate policy actually requires. Sustainable product development is being shortened by AI at the design stage, compressing the cycle from material science discovery to manufacturable, recyclable product in sectors from automotive to packaging. And at the systems level, the most significant environmental potential sits in what might be called net zero enablement. AI modeling grid dispatch decisions in real time, accelerating clean energy R&D, and optimizing carbon removal pathways in ways that fundamentally change what is computationally feasible. The U.S. Government Accountability Office and MIT's research programs have both documented these as areas where AI's environmental contribution is measurable and growing. MIT News, 2025. USGAO, 2025. This is not an argument against AI. It is an argument for intellectual honesty about what the full ledger contains, costs and benefits both. A complete ROI picture includes both sides, and most business cases currently don't. Here is where that 56% zero ROI figure starts to make sense. Mary Mesa, a Gartner analyst who published a framework in 2025, offers what I find to be the most clarifying lens on this problem. Her central argument? Organizations are measuring 3 fundamentally different types of AI investment with the same tool, and then wondering why the numbers don't add up. The first type she calls ROE, Return on Employee. This is AI that makes an individual worker faster. Better emails, quicker research, faster document synthesis. Think of it like a savings account. The returns are real, they compound predictably, and the risk is low. But so is the ceiling. A knowledge worker who completes tasks 15% faster has not transformed the organization's competitive position. ROE is the right baseline. It is not a strategy. The second type is traditional ROI. AI embedded in a business process. Automated claims processing, AI-assisted underwriting, intelligent demand forecasting, route optimization. Think of it like an ETF, diversified, moderate risk, meaningful return if executed well. Higher ceiling than ROE, higher execution risk, longer payback horizon. The third type is ROF, Return on the Future. These are the strategic bets. New business models, entirely new product categories, competitive positions that did not previously exist. Think of it like crypto. High risk, potentially transformative, and the correct measurement horizon is years or decades, not quarters. Now, you might assume that most organizations know which type of investment they are making. It turns out, many of them don't. Or they are making ROF bets while expecting ROE timelines. A CEO who invested in an AI-driven product strategy in 2023 saw no measurable revenue impact by 2025 and logged it as zero ROI is not necessarily sitting on a failed investment. They may be sitting on an early-stage ROF bet that needs 3 more years to pay off. Zero measurable return is accurate, but it doesn't mean what it sounds like. The technology-first paradox, maximum strategic commitment, minimum financial clarity, is, in large part, the savings account calculator being applied to the crypto portfolio. 2 cases that appear regularly in the literature, one peer-reviewed and specific, one legendary and under-examined. The peer-reviewed one comes from Bharadwaj and colleagues, who studied AI-assisted radiology at a stroke-accredited hospital in Australia using Bayer's Calantic platform. The study tracked 1,453 patients over 5 years. The headline ROI figure was 451%, $4.51 returned for every dollar invested. With radiologist time savings included in the model, the figure rose to 791%. At a standalone diagnostic center, one that couldn't capture the downstream stroke procedure revenue, the figure was 41%. The study was published in a peer-reviewed journal. It was funded by Bayer AG, which makes the Calantic platform, a conflict of interest the authors disclosed. And the ROI figures come from a modeled financial calculator, not from directly measured outcomes. I want to be precise about what that means. It is not that the number is wrong. The peer review process and the disclosed methodology make this a credible piece of evidence. It means the 451% return is specific to a stroke-accredited facility that can capture downstream procedure revenue triggered by faster AI diagnosis. Change the setting to a standalone diagnostic center, and the figure drops to 41%. Change the funding source, and someone else might model it differently. The honest version of this finding is AI-assisted radiology can deliver exceptional returns in specific contexts with specific system configurations where the downstream revenue pathways exist. The other case is the one that has been doing laps of business school presentations since approximately 2013. The claim that Amazon's recommendation engine drives 35% of its sales. You have almost certainly seen this number. It has appeared in McKinsey reports, in conference keynotes, in strategy decks, in academic syllabi, often attributed to McKinsey, sometimes to Amazon itself. A 2023 study from the University of Florida put the comparable figure closer to 11%. Amazon has never published the methodology behind the 35% figure. Neither number should be treated as definitive. Here's the thing. The underlying finding is real. AI personalization creates measurable lift in e-commerce conversion. The honest framing is a range, 11 to 35%, context-dependent, methodology-sensitive. The confident single number, cited without a source, is borrowed credibility on a statistic nobody has verified. 3 characteristics of AI investments, identified by Centage in 2025 as the properties that make AI ROI analysis fundamentally distinct from standard technology evaluation, distinguish AI from conventional investment, and change how the numbers should be modeled. AI value is dynamic. It does not stay still at deployment. The model improves as it processes more data, the organization learns to use it more effectively, and returns can compound. But the same dynamism creates decay risk. The demand forecasting models that performed well in 2019 broke in 2020, not because the technology failed, but because the statistical distribution of human behavior shifted in ways no historical training data could have anticipated. COVID didn't break the AI, it broke the assumptions the AI was built on. Modeling AI ROI as a fixed benefit stream over a fixed time horizon misses both the compounding upside and the model drift risk. AI value is probabilistic. JP Morgan's coin system processes legal documents, work that previously required hundreds of thousands of hours of paralegal time, in seconds. The expected value is exceptional, but any individual document carries a confidence interval, a probability that the system's interpretation is incorrect. Managing AI ROI means managing a distribution, not a point estimate. The organizations that get this wrong optimize for the expected case and are blindsided by the tail. AI value is culturally contingent. Epic Systems deployed an AI sepsis detection algorithm in U.S. hospitals. In testing, it performed. In deployment, clinicians overrode alerts at high rates because the alerts didn't fit the clinical workflow, and there was no way to interrogate the model's reasoning. Google's diabetic retinopathy AI received FDA approval. When piloted in rural Thailand, it couldn't be deployed effectively. The device required controlled lighting conditions the clinics didn't have, and the output didn't match how clinicians could act on it. In both cases, ROI was not 0 because the model was wrong. It was 0 because the organizational and cultural conditions for adoption weren't in place. The model is almost never the main variable in an AI investment. It is usually the smallest part. Before we leave the ROI question entirely, there is a practical framework from 2024 that summarizes what all of this implies for how to actually approach an AI investment. Writing in Encore's newsletter, the guidance resolves to 4 principles. Enter with realistic expectations. The gap between perceived value and demonstrable value is real, and assuming the returns arrive quickly is the most common version of the mistake. Account for both financial and non-financial benefits, and define the non-financial metrics before deployment, not after the hard ROI disappoints. Understand that ROI evolves over time. It is not a fixed return captured at a single measurement point, but a distribution that compounds as the model improves, the organization adapts, and the use case deepens. And treat ethical AI practice, responsible deployment, data governance, stakeholder transparency, not as a constraint on value, but as the condition under which sustainable value is achievable. These principles are not idealistic additions to the ROI framework. They are descriptions of what the organizations that have done this successfully actually did. So, the formula, the 4 financial methods, the full taxonomy of ROI types, a portfolio framework that explains why most organizations are measuring incorrectly, 2 real cases with their honest context, 3 reasons why AI returns don't sit still the way the ROI spreadsheet assumes, and 4 principles for approaching the investment with the expectations it actually deserves. What none of this prepares you for is the shape of how value actually arrives over time. The frameworks we covered today are the scoreboard. They tell you what you've earned. What they don't capture is why the score looks the way it does, why AI investment value tends to follow a particular pattern that catches most organizations off guard, and why the organizations that navigate it best are the ones who knew to expect it. That is exactly where we go next. Imagine you are a factory owner in 1895. You have just heard the news about electricity, the extraordinary, flexible, clean power source that requires no coal storage, no boiler house, no permanent fire risk, and can be delivered silently through a wire. You are a practical person. You invest. The engineer arrives. He removes the steam engine from its housing at one end of the building. He installs an electric motor in exactly the same place. He reconnects it to the same horizontal drive shaft that runs the length of the floor, the same shaft that, via the same system of leather belts, distributes power to every workbench, every press, every lathe in the building. He tests it. It works. You wait for the revolution. It doesn't come. At least, not in the form you were expecting, and not for 30 years. A factory that replaced a steam engine with an electric motor in the same location, connected to the same layout, got roughly the same output as before. Sometimes a little more, rarely a lot. The extraordinary productivity gains that electricity eventually made possible, flexible factory layouts, individual workstation power, the assembly line, the ability to have workers where the work needed to happen rather than where the belt happened to run, required something the electric motor alone could not do. They required redesigning the factory itself. And that took a generation. The economic historian Paul David documented this pattern in 1990, and what he found was striking. The productivity gains of electricity did not appear in the manufacturing statistics for approximately 30 years after widespread adoption began. A technology that was genuinely transformative produced, for 3 decades, almost no measurable change in output per worker. The problem was never the technology. The problem was that the factory was still organized around the logic of the thing that had come before it. Erik Brynjolfsson is an economist at MIT. And if you want to understand what is actually happening in most AI deployments right now, his work is more useful than almost anything being published in AI-specific strategy research. Brynjolfsson identified the same pattern David had found in electricity, showing up again with computers in the 1980s. Companies were buying technology at scale, investing billions across sectors, and productivity statistics were not moving. Journalists wrote about the computer paradox, executives questioned the investments, and then, eventually, as organizations rebuilt their workflows, retrained their people, and redesigned processes around what computers could actually do, the productivity gains arrived, steeply, all at once. He calls the pattern the J-curve. Heavy investment goes in at the top left, then there is a dip. Costs mount, disruption accumulates, and the organization discovers that the hard part was never the technology. Then, for organizations that survive and persist, the curve bends upward and climbs. He predicted this would happen with AI. He was right. The healthcare executives who cannot currently point to financial returns from their AI investments are not, for the most part, in failing organizations. Most of them are in the dip. Here is the thing about the dip. Nobody skips it. It is not optional. It is not a sign of poor strategy. It is the predictable consequence of putting the electric motor where the steam engine was and expecting the factory to transform itself around it. The question is not whether you will experience the dip. The question is whether you planned for it. And planning for it requires understanding precisely what it is made of, because the dip has 5 distinct components, each of which needs to appear in the business case before approval, not be discovered in the post-mortem. Take upfront investment first, specifically the gap between the line item on the slide and what eventually lands on the invoice. The software license or the API subscription is the visible cost, the one that gets approved in the room. What tends not to appear on the slide is everything that makes the software work inside your specific organization. Data preparation, system integration, legal review of data use agreements, change management, training for the people who will use it. Not a one-day workshop, but sustained capability building over months. The consulting fees for implementation, the internal engineering hours to connect the AI to your existing systems. A reasonable rule of thumb from organizations that have been honest about what AI actually costs to deploy properly is that the software license represents somewhere between 20 and 40% of the true first-year investment. The rest is everything else. This is not a reason not to invest. It is a reason to budget honestly. And the organizations that don't do this are almost always the ones that declare the project a failure at month 8, when the real work of deployment is still in progress. Then there is data quality, and specifically the 80-20 rule that almost never gets mentioned in the vendor demo. In a typical AI project, approximately 80% of the time and effort goes into the data. Not the model, the data. The model is often the easy part. Getting the data clean enough, complete enough, correctly labeled, properly formatted, and representative of the real problem you are trying to solve, that is the work. Poor quality data does not produce a slightly worse AI. It produces an AI that confidently produces wrong answers, which is considerably more dangerous than no AI at all. The vendor demo almost certainly ran on their showcase data. Your organization's data is a different thing, accumulated over years across different systems with different conventions, gaps, duplicates, and edge cases that nobody documented because they were handled by the person who retired in 2019. This is not an embarrassing secret. It is the normal state of organizational data everywhere, but it needs to be on the business case. Integration with existing systems is, consistently, the most underestimated of the 5 factors, and the one most directly responsible for the depth of the J-curve's dip. This is, in fact, the factory layout problem played out in modern software. AI does not create value in isolation. It creates value inside a workflow, connected to the systems where the work actually happens, the data where the relevant information lives, and the people whose decisions it is supposed to improve. An AI diagnostic tool that cannot write into the clinical record system is not a diagnostic tool. It is a second opinion that requires manual transcription. An AI demand forecasting system that cannot read from the inventory database or write to the ordering system requires someone to transfer numbers between screens. A customer service AI that has no access to order history will give confident responses with no relation to the customer's actual situation. The factory owner in 1895 put the motor where the steam engine had been and left the belts in place. The modern equivalent is buying the AI and leaving the workflow in place. The gains from electricity came when factories were redesigned from scratch around what electricity made possible. The gains from AI come when workflows are redesigned around what AI makes possible. That redesign takes time, costs money, and generates significant short-term disruption, all of which lives in the dip. Talent is the fourth factor, and it is the one you cannot outsource to the vendor, regardless of what the contract says. The model does not deploy itself. It does not monitor itself. It does not know when it has started to drift, when its outputs have become subtly wrong, or when a change in the underlying data has undermined its assumptions. It does not know when to trust its own confidence score and when to flag a case for human review. You need people who understand both the AI and the domain it is operating in. Not just AI specialists and not just domain experts, the combination. A radiologist who cannot interpret a confidence interval and a data scientist who cannot interpret a chest X-ray are both missing something critical. The talent required to make AI work well inside an organization is specific, expensive, and genuinely scarce. And unlike the software license, you cannot simply upgrade to a better version when the requirements change. This is one of the reasons AI projects fail, not because the model was wrong, but because nobody was watching it closely enough to notice when it started being wrong. The practical output of getting talent right is a governance decision that managers often skip entirely, and it is exactly the oversight gap that turns a probabilistic AI system into an operational liability. Before any AI is embedded in a workflow, someone with genuine domain expertise needs to classify every task type into one of three operational tiers. The first is AI alone, low-stakes, well-defined tasks where the AI can act without review because the cost of an occasional error is low and the feedback loop to catch it is fast. The second is human checkpoint, where the AI generates an output, but a person with domain expertise reviews it before anything is acted upon. This is the appropriate setting for most consequential business decisions. The AI drafts, a human approves. The third tier is human only, tasks where AI may inform the context but cannot execute because the stakes of an incorrect output are too high to manage through any checkpoint mechanism. Clinical diagnosis in certain settings, hiring decisions, legal filings, safety-critical operational choices. Think of these tiers less as compliance bureaucracy and more as the harness you put on before stepping onto the J-curve. Getting the classification wrong is not a technical failure. It is a management failure, and it tends to produce the most expensive postmortems. The fifth and final factor is maintenance, because models drift, and the world keeps moving in ways the original training data could not anticipate. A traditional software upgrade works the same in year 3 as it did in year 1, unless deliberately changed. An AI model does not. The most vivid demonstration of this happened in 2020. Virtually every demand forecasting model operating in retail, logistics, and hospitality had been trained on pre-pandemic data, years of historical purchase behavior, travel patterns, and consumer habits. In March 2020, the statistical distribution of human behavior changed faster than any model could adapt to. The models did not fail because of a technical error. They failed because the world they had been trained to understand had stopped existing. COVID was an extreme case, but the underlying phenomenon, model drift, the slow or sudden divergence between the world the model was trained on and the world it is currently operating in, is a permanent feature of AI systems, not an exception. Maintaining an AI model is an ongoing cost, not a sunk cost. The business case that shows AI investment in year 1 and then assumes a fixed benefit stream thereafter is describing a machine that no one is maintaining. That machine will drift. The only question is whether anyone notices before it causes a problem. It would be professionally convenient if vendor incentives were fully aligned with yours. They are not always. The AI vendor's interest is in the signed contract, the successful pilot, and the renewal. The pilot almost always works. It was designed to work, with the vendor's support on a carefully selected dataset with favorable conditions. The production deployment, 6 months later, running on your data, on your infrastructure, integrated into your workflows, managed by your team, is a different situation. The vendor may or may not be as present for that part. There is also the lock-in problem, which happens quietly. When you build applications on top of a vendor's API, you embed their pricing, their latency, their data handling terms, and their continued existence into your own system's architecture. Switching later is not impossible, but it is expensive in engineering time and carries the risk of breaking things that were built around the original provider's specific behavior. The pricing that looked attractive at pilot scale often looks different when you are running millions of API calls per month at production volume. Egress fees, fine-tuning costs, and dedicated compute charges appear on the invoice in ways that the pilot cost estimate did not fully anticipate. None of this is unique to AI. It is the same dynamic that played out with cloud computing a decade ago and enterprise software before that. But it is worth naming clearly because AI vendors are currently competing aggressively on pilot pricing to build market share, and the cost structure of a mature production deployment is not always the same conversation. Here is something that comes up in practically every AI governance conversation, and it is almost always what sets up the biggest post-mortem argument 12 months later. AI investments almost universally get approved as software, which means they sit in operating expenditure, show up as a recurring line item, and get evaluated on the same timeline as a SaaS subscription. Did it deliver value this quarter? Most AI investments behave like infrastructure, which means they require significant upfront commitment, generate limited visible returns in the early period, and deliver their real value over a multi-year horizon as the organization restructures around them. If you have been in this conversation with a CFO, you will recognize the dynamic. The AI business case goes in as OpEx. It is easier to approve, easier to budget, and easier to frame as a controllable recurring cost. But the investment actually behaves like CapEx, long payback horizon, front-loaded costs, value that accumulates slowly and then steeply. Nobody asks whether a new factory building delivered ROI in its first 6 months. But when the AI quarterly review arrives at month 6 and the numbers are underwhelming, the conversation can go sideways very quickly. Not because the investment is failing, but because it was approved under the wrong set of expectations. The fix is not complicated, but it requires honesty at the business case stage. AI investments that require significant process redesign should be evaluated on infrastructure timelines, not software timelines. Approval processes that do not allow for that distinction will systematically underinvest in the things that create the most value and systematically approve the things that look good at month 6. The organizations that navigated the J-curve successfully did not find a way to skip the dip. The dip exists. It is predictable. What they did differently was plan for it. They budgeted for total cost of ownership, not just the license fee, but the data work, the integration, the talent, and the maintenance. They set realistic return timelines, measured in years rather than quarters, for anything that required process redesign. They started with use cases where the data was already clean, the workflow integration was relatively straightforward, and the human review layer was manageable. And they treated model maintenance as a permanent operational cost, not a post-implementation afterthought. The factory owners who got the most from electricity were not the ones with the best motors. They were the ones who understood that the motor was the beginning, and that the real work was redesigning everything around it. That same understanding, translated from 1895 factory floors into 2025 AI programs, resolves to 4 operating principles that a 2024 review of AI adoption practice articulated more precisely than most strategy frameworks manage. Enter with realistic expectations. The dip is real, the timeline is longer than the slide deck suggests, And optimism about the timeline is the most expensive form of dishonesty in the business case. Account for both financial and non-financial benefits. The full return picture includes things that compound before they appear on the income statement. Understand that ROI evolves. What the investment returns at month 6 and what it returns at year 3 are different numbers, and evaluating the program at month 6 against year 3 assumptions is how good investments get canceled. And treat ethical deployment not as a compliance burden, but as a prerequisite for sustainable returns. Because the organizations that cut corners on data governance, transparency, and stakeholder trust tend to discover that the model's performance degrades alongside the relationship. So now you have the full picture. A technology still in the fluid phase, 3 ways to compete, a complete ROI taxonomy, and an honest account of what the investment actually costs and the shape it takes over time.
What we have not yet addressed, and what pulls all of this together, is where, specifically, AI creates the kind of value that justifies the dip. Not in general. Concretely, the 5 business areas where the evidence is strongest, where the case studies are most credible, and where organizations with limited appetite for risk and unlimited pressure to deliver can make the most defensible start. That is the last chapter, and it is where the theory finally meets the decision you actually have to make. Picture a hospital. Any hospital. Let's say it is a mid-sized general hospital, the kind with a radiology department on the 2nd floor and an HR office somewhere near the back of the building where the carpet has been the same color since 1998. Both floors have deployed AI this year. Same budget cycle. Same vendor conversations. Same board enthusiasm. On the 2nd floor, the radiologist has 40 chest scans to review before lunch. She has been doing this work for 22 years, and she is very good at it. But volume is volume. When the queue is long, each image gets seconds of attention, not minutes. The AI has already looked at every scan before she opens it. It has flagged regions of interest. It has assigned confidence levels. It has surfaced the cases most likely to contain findings worth examining closely. What happens next, across multiple studies of AI-assisted radiology, is consistent. Her diagnostic accuracy for certain categories of finding improves meaningfully. Not because she got smarter, because her attention was redirected to where it was most needed. The AI did not replace her judgment. It aimed it. Near the back of the building, the HR team is running an AI scheduling system. It generates shift rosters that are technically correct. The hours balance, the credentials match, the regulatory requirements are met. The senior nurses override it, almost every time. Not because the AI made a legal error, because experienced nurses know that certain staff combinations on night shift create dynamics that don't live in any database. Personalities, working styles, specific patient cohorts that require particular expertise. The AI doesn't know this. Nobody told it. The nurse's overrides never feed back into the model. The system runs, it produces outputs, it does not help. Same hospital, same week. One AI that is genuinely changing outcomes, and one that is generating technically valid outputs that nobody uses. The question this module has been building toward is not whether AI creates value. It is under what conditions it does, and where, specifically, is the evidence clearest that those conditions can be reliably met. The answer has 5 parts. Operational efficiency is where you start. Not because it is the most exciting, it is not, but because the evidence is clearest, the conditions are most reliably achievable,
and the dip is shortest.
McKinsey estimates that AI has the potential to add approximately $4.4 trillion in productivity growth from corporate use cases alone, the majority of it through operational improvements, automating time-consuming processes, improving supply chain management, reducing waste, enhancing overall throughput. These are not speculative projections. They are derived from documented efficiency gains across sectors where AI has been deployed in structured, well-defined processes with clean data and measurable outcomes. The reason operational efficiency is the most reliable entry point is exactly that. The data tends to be structured, the process tends to be defined, and the success metric is usually clear. Amazon's logistics infrastructure, Kiva robots moving inventory shelves to workers rather than workers walking to shelves, cut average travel distance per shift by roughly 95%. Predictive maintenance systems in manufacturing detect equipment failure before it happens, reducing unplanned downtime across industries from aviation to oil and gas. AI-optimized routing and logistics scheduling reduces fuel consumption and delivery time simultaneously. None of these are glamorous. They do not appear on the innovation slide deck. But this is where the J-curve's dip is shallowest, where the ROI calculation most reliably produces a positive NPV, and where organizations build the evidence base and internal confidence to go further. If you are asking where to start, and Porter's framework, applied honestly to your specific position, will help you decide which variant of this is most defensible for you, start here. From operational efficiency, the natural progression is to customer experience, where the value becomes visible to the people who matter most, and where the measurement problem becomes genuinely acute. The canonical example in this module is Amazon's recommendation system, the engine that analyzes browsing and purchase history, surfaces products customers did not know they wanted, and accounts for a substantial proportion of Amazon's total sales. The course documents that figure at approximately 35% of revenue, attributed to McKinsey. The strategic logic is sound, regardless of the precise number. An AI that makes the shopping experience more personally relevant creates stickier customers, higher basket values, and improved conversion rates. The value is real. The question is how cleanly it can be measured. This is the defining challenge of customer experience AI. The benefit shows up in customer satisfaction, loyalty, and retention before it shows up in revenue, and those intermediate outcomes are harder to attach a number to than operational cost savings. The organizations that do this well treat customer experience AI as a long-cycle investment, measured over months and years through retention cohorts and lifetime value calculations, not over weeks through single-session metrics. The value compounds. It just requires patience in the measurement and a soft ROI framework defined before deployment, not after the fact. Decision-making is where the ceiling is highest and the failure mode is most instructive, and it is the area where the design of the human layer matters as much as the design of the model. Back to the radiologist on the second floor. What the AI is doing in that example is not making decisions. It is structuring information so that a human decision maker can make a better one, faster, with attention directed at the cases most likely to need it. That is the pattern that works. The Bharadwaj study that underpins discussion 3.4, 1,453 patients, 5 years, Bayer's Calantic platform in a stroke-accredited hospital, produced a 451% ROI precisely because it satisfied those conditions: structured input, defined outcome, human review baked into the workflow, and downstream revenue from faster, more accurate diagnosis that could be captured and measured. Change any of those conditions, and the ROI changes with it, dropping to 41% at a standalone diagnostic center that could not capture the stroke procedure revenue downstream. The failure mode, as we saw in Chapter 3 with the Epic Systems sepsis detection algorithm, is where the AI's outputs don't integrate into the human workflow, where clinicians have no way to interrogate the model's reasoning, no feedback loop, no design for adoption. Decision-making AI that bypasses human judgment or that produces outputs people can't act on does not improve decisions. It adds noise. The rule that travels from this: design the adoption conditions before you design the model. Who will act on the output? What do they need in order to trust it? What happens when they disagree? The answers to those questions shape the deployment far more than the algorithm does. Innovation is the most compelling value area, and for most organizations, the least immediately achievable. It is also the one that separates genuine strategic transformation from operational improvement with a better name. AlphaFold is the reference point for what AI-driven innovation looks like at its most significant. A system that predicted the three-dimensional structure of virtually every known protein, compressing decades of potential research into roughly 18 months, and earning a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in October 2024 for the science it made possible. Profluent Bio, which we encountered in Chapter 2, represents the same logic applied to drug discovery, designing molecules with specified properties from scratch, inverting a research process that had governed pharmaceutical development for a century. Here is the honest qualification: most organizations are not Profluent Bio. Innovation-level AI value requires proprietary data accumulated over years, genuine domain depth, and a problem specific enough that the AI can be built around something a competitor cannot easily replicate. It is Candalone's golden use case territory. The organizations that reach it almost never start there. They start with operational efficiency, build the data capability, develop the talent, and discover, sometimes years later, that they have accumulated the assets that make a genuinely novel application possible. McKinsey's 2024 guidance for maximizing generative AI value describes exactly this progression. Identify where AI gives you a real competitive advantage specific to your organization. Upskill your people with the precise capabilities required. Form a centralized team to establish standards that allow responsible scaling. Build the technology architecture that can grow with the use case. Ensure the data quality that powers the model. And then build trust and reusability so that adoption spreads. That is not a list of separate tasks. It is a sequenced program of work. The organizations that treat it as a checklist fail. The ones that treat it as a capability journey earn the right to innovate. Here is the tension worth sitting with, though, because it is exactly the kind of question that surfaces in executive teams and never quite gets resolved. McKinsey's guidance calls for forming a centralized team to establish the standards that allow responsible scaling. That advice is sound as far as it goes, but Stanley McChrystal's Team of Teams framework, developed from his experience commanding U.S. Special Operations Forces in Iraq and applied extensively to organizational design since, points at a genuine counterforce. McChrystal's central finding was that in complex, fast-moving environments, centralized command structures create fatal information lag. The entities closest to the problem hold the situational intelligence needed to act, but they wait for a central authority that has the power to decide, but not the context to decide well. The solution he documented was not to abolish standards, but to distribute fluency. Small, empowered teams sharing enough context to act autonomously within agreed parameters, rather than routing every decision through a central function that understands the technology but not the domain. Applied to AI in large organizations. A centralized AI team that owns all deployment decisions risks becoming exactly the bottleneck McChrystal described. The business units most in need of AI, clinical teams, logistics operations, legal departments, customer service, understand their problems at a depth no central team can fully replicate. A team in IT that sets the standards but lacks domain fluency will design guardrails that either over-restrict what the domain needs or underprotect where the real risk lives. The resolution is not McKinsey or McChrystal. It is what organizational theorists increasingly call federated governance. Central teams set standards, security requirements, and ethical guardrails, but deployment decision-making and genuine technical fluency are embedded in the functional units, not isolated in a central IT function that nobody in operations fully understands. Both frameworks are right. The organizations that treat them as contradictions tend to build one of two things: an ungoverned patchwork of domain AI, or a perfectly governed system that nobody uses. Competitiveness is the fifth area, and it is where everything in this module connects. We started in Chapter 1 with the question of who, in AI, would be the QWERTY, the dominant design that reaches critical mass and becomes too embedded to displace. We moved in Chapter 2 through Porter's 3 strategies and the BCG distinction between table stakes and golden use cases. We measured value in Chapter 3, counted the real costs in Chapter 4, and have now traced the 5 areas where that value most reliably accumulates. Competitiveness is the sum of how well all of the above has been done. DeepSeek built a cost leadership position in AI model provision that took market share from competitors with a 35-fold pricing advantage because someone understood that cost leadership applied to AI infrastructure was defensible and built for it. Harvey built an $11 billion legal AI business not by competing on general capability, but by going deep on a specific domain where general-purpose models couldn't match the specialization. Neither company started with a competitiveness goal. They started with a position, cost leadership, focus, and built toward competitiveness as the J-curve delivered on its promise. Sustainable competitive advantage, in Porter's framing, comes from continuously innovating and adapting within a chosen position, not from deploying the most AI, but from deploying it most purposefully in the areas where your organization's specific assets create returns that competitors cannot easily replicate. 4 chapters of landscape, strategy, measurement, and cost accounting eventually lead to the same practical question from the executive, who has been patient enough to follow all of it. Given everything, where do I actually start? 3 questions will take you further than any framework. First, where is your data cleanest and most structured? That is almost always where your first AI deployment will be most reliable. The model needs inputs it can trust, and you need a feedback loop to know when it is wrong. Operational efficiency and structured decision-making applications typically sit here. Start with a pilot project, set clear KPIs before you begin, and define what success looks like at 6 months and at 2 years, because those are different numbers, and treating them as the same is where business cases go wrong. Second, where does your organization hold something a competitor cannot easily replicate? Proprietary data, deep domain expertise, a specific operational capability, or a problem that is uniquely yours to solve? That is your golden use case. Most organizations have 1 or 2 of these if they look honestly. The McKinsey principle applies here. Figure out where generative AI can give you a real competitive advantage specific to who you are, not where it gives everyone a productivity lift, but where it gives you something nobody else can easily match. Third, how much dip can your organization absorb? Not how much it should be able to absorb in theory, how much it actually can given board patience, budget cycles, and the political reality of what happens when the 6-month review arrives and the NPV is $11,000 on an $800,000 investment. That answer sets your timeline, your sequencing, and the risk tolerance you can honestly commit to. The 5 areas are a map, not a destination. Use them to find where you are, where the evidence is strongest for organizations positioned like yours, and what the conditions you need to build look like before you build them. Forbes published a 2024 review of what successfully competitive organizations actually do,
And the honest answer is that the list looks more like operational plumbing than strategic revelation, which is precisely why it matters. The organizations that navigate the 5 value areas we've covered almost invariably do the unglamorous work first, and they do it in a sequence. They begin by aligning their AI ambitions with specific business goals and customer needs. Not, we want to be an AI-first company, but we want to reduce this customer wait time by this amount for this specific cohort. And here is why that matters for revenue. That specificity is what prevents the strategy from drifting into right-pointing arrows. From that specificity, they establish clear objectives and measurable KPIs before any deployment begins, because a KPI defined after the result is known is not a KPI, it is a narrative. They deploy through pilot projects rather than at full scale, deliberately limited in scope and designed to generate evidence rather than demonstrate organizational commitment. When the pilot works, you have a data point. When it does not, you have information that a full-scale failure would have cost 10 times as much to acquire. They ensure interoperability and security. The AI integrates with existing architecture and meets data governance requirements before it meets innovation ambitions. An AI that cannot connect to the systems where work actually happens, or that introduces data risk the organization cannot absorb, does not belong in production regardless of its benchmark scores. And critically, and this is the step most strategic roadmaps skip entirely, they invest in encouraging managers and functional stakeholders to drive adoption from within their domains. AI that a central team deploys but frontline managers do not trust or understand will stall at exactly the point it needs to accelerate. The adoption energy has to come from the people doing the work, not just the people who approved the budget. The whole program connects through a strategic roadmap with agreed milestones and defined success criteria at each stage. Not a destination slide, a sequenced program of work with accountability built in at 6 months, 18 months, and 3 years. These conditions are, consistently, what separates a real AI strategy from a slide deck full of corporate optimism and right-pointing arrows. That radiologist on the second floor? Let me come back to her one more time. She is not afraid of the AI. She has been watching it work for 18 months now. She has noticed that the cases she almost missed, the ones that would have required a callback and a delay and a patient waiting in uncertainty, more of those are getting caught. Not all of them, but more. And in radiology, the difference between a finding caught on the first read and a finding caught on the second is sometimes nothing. And sometimes, for the patient on the other end of that report, it is everything. What she told a researcher studying AI adoption in clinical settings was not about the technology at all. She said she was worried about the hospitals that hadn't deployed it yet, about the patients who would end up in her department later, referred for something that might have been seen sooner somewhere else. That is what AI value looks like when the conditions are right. Not a percentage in a consulting report, not a line on a financial model. A better answer for someone who needed one, arriving just slightly faster than it would have otherwise. The frameworks exist to get organizations to more of those moments. All of the strategy, the ROI taxonomy, the cost accounting, the honest reckoning with the dip, it is all in service of that. And that, finally, is the honest case for the business value of AI.